Mom. Oh my God, Mom. The Mafia boss's voice shattered the frozen silence of the December morning. His mother slumped against the mansion gate, barefoot on the snow, wrapped tightly in the arms of a young woman so thin he could count her ribs through her threadbare sweater. A moth-eaten blanket barely enough for one person covered them both. The young woman's lips had turned blue. Her body shook with violent tremors, yet her arms remained locked around the old woman she'd kept alive through the coldest night of the year. Grateful and shaken, the most dangerous man in the city would soon vow to help this stranger rebuild her shattered life, unaware that this single act of compassion would transform his own in ways he could never imagine. Can you imagine finding your mother like this? Discovering that a homeless young woman, someone the world had used, broken, and thrown away, had saved her life while you were away, handling business, closing deals, eliminating enemies. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to where it all began. 8 hours earlier, Scarlett Monroe had exactly $23.17 to her name when the shelter turned her away into the December cold. No home, no family, no one waiting for her anywhere in this world. She had every reason to think only of herself that night, every reason to walk away when she saw the old woman wandering barefoot in the snow. But Scarlett made a different choice, the kind of choice that changes everything. Before we dive deeper into this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. 8 hours before that fateful moment, Scarlett Monroe stood before the tightly shut doors of Hope Street Shelter, staring at the red sign that blinked the words "No Vacancy" like a sentence being handed down. She had been in line since 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 hours in the skin-slicing cold of December in Chicago, only to hear the woman behind the counter shake her head and say there was no space left. Snow began to fall, the first flakes settling on the shoulders of her thin coat and melting into water. The temperature had dropped below -5 degrees and kept slipping lower. Scarlett slid her hand into her pocket, her fingers brushing a few coins and a crumpled bill. Everything she owned in this world. $23.17. Not enough to rent even the cheapest motel room. Not enough to buy a decent meal. Just enough to remind her that she still existed, even though this world seemed to have forgotten that fact. She hitched her old backpack higher on her shoulder, feeling its familiar weight. Inside were only 2 worn changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a dented plastic water bottle, a photograph of her mother carefully wrapped in plastic, and the wool blanket her mother had knitted for her before she left this world. The coat Scarlett wore had been bought at Goodwill 3 years earlier for $5, and even then it had been old. Now it was nearly useless against the brutal cold of winter. She knew the warming center had closed since the afternoon and wouldn't open again until tomorrow morning. And tonight, with temperatures like this, tomorrow morning could be too late. Scarlett closed her eyes, and memory crashed over her like a wave she couldn't hold back. She saw her mother, Linda Monroe, lying on a charity hospital bed 9 years earlier. Cancer had drained the life from her, and they hadn't had enough money for treatment. Scarlett had been 18 then, gripping her mother's thin hand, feeling each faint beat like a countdown to the last seconds. Her mother had looked at her with eyes full of love and said, "Promise me, Scar, promise me you'll always hold on to kindness. Kindness is the only asset no one can ever take from you. No matter what happens, no matter how hard life gets, don't let them turn your heart to ice." Scarlett had cried and whispered, "I promise, Mom." That night, Linda Monroe let out her final breath, leaving her 18-year-old daughter alone in the world with a promise and a shattered heart. Scarlett opened her eyes and pulled herself back into the cold reality. She started walking with no destination, moving only to keep her blood flowing, to keep her body from freezing. Her feet carried her through downtown Chicago, where Christmas lights glittered across every storefront. Music spilled out from bars and restaurants, laughter and conversation from people savoring the holiday season. The scent of warm food drifted through the air. Roasted turkey, cookies, hot chocolate. Scarlett passed an Italian restaurant and looked through the glass at a family eating dinner, a small child shrieking with laughter while the father made faces. She didn't envy them. She was too tired to envy anything. She only wondered, the same way she had wondered thousands of times over the past 9 years, whether she would ever belong anywhere, whether there was anyone in this world waiting for her. Her feet kept moving, and Scarlett didn't realize how far she'd gone until the streetlights grew fewer, and the buildings around her began to change. No more shops and bars. Instead, massive estates rose like palaces, hidden behind high stone walls and imposing iron gates. Security cameras were mounted everywhere, and luxury cars sat in garages large enough to hold the apartment she'd once lived in. This was Chicago's wealthy suburb, a place where people like her didn't belong. Scarlett lowered her head and walked faster, trying to become invisible. She knew that in places like this, a homeless girl wandering at midnight would mean nothing but trouble. The police would be called, questions would be asked, and she had no answers, no papers, nothing to prove who she was or where she came from. She only wanted to get through this neighborhood quickly, find some spot sheltered from the wind, and make it through the night. She didn't know that fate had already arranged an encounter that would change everything, right in the very place she believed she could never belong. Around 11 o'clock at night, Scarlett passed the largest estate in the area, a colossal piece of architecture, with stone walls at least 10 feet high, an iron gate worked with intricate patterns, and security cameras fixed at every corner like eyes that never slept. She lowered her head even more and quickened her pace, wanting only to get past this place as fast as she could. But then her gaze slid, by accident, along the side of the estate, and she noticed something wrong. A service gate stood open, not cracked, but wide open, and an alarm light blinked red like a warning. The electronic lock looked as if it had malfunctioned. 9 years of surviving on the streets spoke instantly inside Scarlett's mind. Keep going. This isn't your business. An open gate in a rich neighborhood means trouble, means police, means questions you can't answer. She turned away, about to keep walking, when a sound stopped her cold, crying, thin and trembling, like the sound of a lost child. But it wasn't a child. It was the sound of an old person. Scarlett stood there, torn between reason and instinct. Reason told her to run. Something deeper pulled her back. And then she heard the voice. An older woman's voice, broken by cold and fear, drifting from the snow-covered road. Richard? Richard, where are you? I can't find my way home. Scarlett looked toward the sound, and her heart seemed to stop. A figure was stumbling in the street about 65 feet away. An elderly woman, maybe 76 or 77 years old, white hair spilling past her shoulders, was walking barefoot on the thick snow. She wore a thin, pale blue cotton nightgown scattered with tiny flowers, the kind of thing meant for a heated bedroom, not the middle of a frozen winter night. Her lips had already begun to turn purple. Her bare feet were flushed red with cold, leaving shaking footprints on the white snow. She walked and cried at the same time, calling out a name Scarlett didn't know. Another voice rose in Scarlett's mind, not her survival instinct this time. It was her mother's voice, gentle but unmistakable, as if she were standing right beside her. Kindness is the only wealth they can't take from you. Scarlett looked down at the old woman's bare feet on the snow, then down at her own battered shoes. She knew this kind of cold could kill. She knew if the woman kept going like this, she wouldn't live through the night. And she also knew that if she stopped to help, she might freeze right alongside her. But she couldn't walk away. She couldn't turn her back on a life that needed help, even if it belonged to a stranger. I can't leave her, Scarlett whispered to herself, and she started running toward the woman. Ma'am, are you okay? Scarlett approached carefully, her voice soft, as if she were speaking to a frightened bird. The old woman turned, her eyes clouded by age and confusion, looking at Scarlett as though she could see right through her. Then, suddenly, her face brightened, a trembling smile forming on her bluish lips. Evelyn, is that you, sweetheart? I've been looking for you everywhere. Scarlett understood at once. This woman had Alzheimer's. She didn't know where she was, didn't know who she was, and she was searching for someone who might not have been with her for a long time. She had wandered out through the broken side gate, and now she was slowly dying in a cold she couldn't even fully comprehend. Yes, I'm here, Scarlett said gently, deciding that sometimes a merciful lie mattered more than the truth. I'm here now. Let's get you somewhere warm, okay? She took off her own scarf, the only warmth she had besides the blanket in her backpack, and wrapped it around the woman's neck. Then she carefully took the woman's thin, trembling arm and guided her toward the estate's main gate. She didn't know that this choice, the choice to stop instead of walk on, the choice to give instead of cling to what little she had, would change her entire life in ways she could never have imagined. Scarlett guided Margaret to the main gate of the estate, hoping she could find a way to get her inside, into warmth and safety. But the tall iron gate was locked tight, like a fortress wall no one could cross. She looked around and spotted an intercom mounted on a stone pillar, its button glowing faintly in the darkness. She pressed it and waited. No answer. She pressed it again, holding it down longer this time. Still silence. She pressed it 5 times, 10 times, 20 times, but only the wind whistling through the gaps in the gate answered her. Inside the estate, Patricia, the housekeeper who had worked for the Blackwood family for more than 20 years, was sunk in deep sleep after a long day, never hearing the intercom chime in the middle of the night. Scarlett needed to call someone. needed to alert someone, needed to do something. But she didn't have a phone. She hadn't had a phone for 2 years now, ever since she escaped that hell. A phone required money, required an address, required things she didn't have. She scanned the empty road, hoping to see a person, a passing car, anyone who could help. But the streets of the wealthy neighborhood at midnight were still as a graveyard, not a soul in sight. "Stay here, okay? I'll find help," Scarlett told Margaret, settling her against the stone pillar beside the gate. Then she ran to the nearest house, about 164 feet away. She knocked hard, knocked again and again. The lights stayed off. No one answered. She ran to the second house. This time she saw a security camera angled toward her, its cold lens recording the image of a thin, ragged girl standing at their gate at midnight. She knew they were watching her. She knew they could see her. But the door stayed shut. No one wanted to open for a homeless stranger in the middle of the night, even if she was begging for help. She ran to the third house. A dog barked violently from inside, then fell silent, as if someone had clamped a hand over its mouth. And then, quiet. No one opened. No one cared. This was the rich neighborhood, where people built high walls and sealed gates to keep the outside world away, where a human life could die right in front of their door, and they still wouldn't open it for fear of trouble. Scarlett ran back to Margaret, her heart pounding with dread, and when she saw the old woman, her heart dropped into her stomach. Margaret had sunk down onto the snow, her head slumped against her chest, her eyes dull, as if she were slipping into a deadly sleep. Her lips were even more purple than before, her skin pale as wax. Her body shook violently, the uncontrollable shivering of someone sinking into severe hypothermia. "No, no, no," Scarlett whispered, dropping to her knees beside her and shaking her shoulder gently. "Ma'am, you can't sleep. Please, stay awake." Margaret opened her eyes and looked at Scarlett through cloudy, exhausted eyes. "I'm so tired, dear. Let me rest a little, just a little while." "No," Scarlett almost screamed. She knew that if Margaret fell asleep in the snow tonight, she would never wake again. Sleep in this cold was death sleep. Scarlett looked around in desperation, searching for any solution at all. And then her gaze stopped on her backpack, where her mother's wool blanket lay neatly inside. That blanket was the only thing left from her old life. Her mother had knitted it in the last months of her life, stitch by stitch, strand by strand, each one holding the love of a mother for her daughter. The blanket had kept Scarlett warm through 2 years of wandering the streets. Sometimes, on the loneliest nights, she would close her eyes and imagine she could still smell her mother in the worn wool. It was the last thing she had, the only thing she had. "Mom gave me this blanket," Scarlett whispered, her hands trembling as she unzipped the bag. "It's all I have left of her." She looked at Margaret, the stranger shivering in the cold, dying right in front of her. "But Mom also gave me a promise, and I know what she would do right now." Scarlett pulled the blanket out and felt, one last time, its familiar softness beneath her numb fingers. Then she wrapped it around Margaret, wrapping it tight, careful, as if she were holding her mother in her arms again. She guided Margaret to the corner of the main gate, where a small overhang could block some of the wind. She sat down, pulled Margaret against her, used her own body as a shield, used the last warmth of her breath to keep this stranger alive. The cold began to seep into every cell of Scarlett's body, now that the blanket was no longer hers. She knew she might die tonight. She knew she was gambling her life for someone she had never met, never known by name, never owed anything to. But she also knew she couldn't do otherwise. "If I die tonight," Scarlett whispered into the darkness, her lips trembling with cold, "at least I die keeping a promise. At least I die being the person Mom wanted me to be." And she held Margaret tighter, praying that someone would come before it was too late. In Scarlett's arms, Margaret slowly began to settle. The warmth from the young woman's body, and the wool blanket wrapped around her, softened the violent shaking that had racked her before. Then she started to talk, her voice broken, drifting in and out of clarity, leaping back and forth between past and present like an old film with missing frames. "Richard always made me hot cocoa on cold nights like this," she murmured, her clouded eyes fixed on empty space as if she could see someone Scarlett couldn't. 60 years of marriage, and he never forgot. Not once. He would bring it to me in bed, with exactly 2 marshmallows, because he knew I loved marshmallows. Scarlett listened without interrupting, only holding her a little tighter so she'd know someone was there. "Evelyn loved the snow," Margaret went on, and suddenly her voice sounded younger, as if she'd slipped back to some distant moment in memory. "She would dance in it, catch snowflakes on her tongue. She was so beautiful, my little girl, my sunshine." Then her voice sank, heavier now. Vincent, my boy. He used to be so gentle. But after Richard died, after Evelyn, he changed, became hard, cold. I miss the boy he used to be. The boy who would pick flowers for me every Sunday. Scarlett didn't know who Richard was. She didn't know who Evelyn was. She didn't know who Vincent was, but she understood the pain in Margaret's voice. The pain of someone who had lost too much. Ethan is so alone, Margaret continued, and this time worry filled her words. His mother died when he was just a baby. Vincent tries, but he doesn't know how to show love. The boy needs someone kind. Then, all at once, Margaret turned and looked at Scarlett, and for a moment her eyes brightened as if she were truly seeing her. "What's your name, dear?" Scarlett smiled, even though her lips had started to go numb. "Scarlett, like the color of sunset." "Scarlett," Margaret repeated, as if tasting the name on her tongue. "That's beautiful." Evelyn loved sunsets. She used to paint them. Hundreds of paintings, all sunsets, all different. She said no two sunsets are ever the same. She took Scarlett's hand, her thin fingers warm beneath the blanket. "You have kind eyes, Scarlett. I can see it. Real kindness. It's rare these days. Most people wear kindness like a mask. But yours comes from inside." The night deepened, and the temperature dropped further. Scarlett began to lose feeling in her fingers, in her toes. The cold didn't hurt anymore. It was only numbness now, spreading slowly from her limbs toward the center of her body. She knew what that meant. It was bad, very bad. But there was nothing she could do except keep holding Margaret, keep her awake. She began to sing, her voice trembling with cold, yet still trying to hold the melody. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray." It was the song her mother used to sing to her every night before sleep, the song she hadn't sung in 9 years. Not since the night her mother closed her eyes for the last time. Margaret smiled, her eyes drifting shut with the tune, and Scarlett panicked. "Stay with me, ma'am. Don't sleep. Tell me more about Evelyn. Please." Margaret opened her eyes and looked at Scarlett, and this time she truly saw her. Saw the purple lips, the waxy pallor, the body shaking beyond control. "You're freezing, child," she said, her voice full of concern. "Take the blanket. You need it." "I'm okay," Scarlett lied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You need it more than me." "No one has ever—" Margaret stopped, and tears began to slip down her cheeks, tears that froze almost at once in the merciless cold. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." "Because you needed someone," Scarlett whispered. "And I was here." "You're an angel," Margaret sobbed. "God sent you to me tonight, an angel in a worn coat with kind eyes." The hours that followed dragged on like a nightmare with no end. Scarlett couldn't feel her body anymore. Her lips were dark purple. Her hands and feet shook without control, and her mind began to blur at the edges. She knew she was dying. She could feel life leaving her a little at a time, like water leaking through a crack. "Is this how it ends?" she asked herself in her mind, thoughts slowing, breaking apart. 27 years of surviving, and I die on a stranger's doorstep. But she's still breathing. She's still warm. That's enough. "Mom, I kept my promise. I stayed kind." Margaret suddenly jolted awake, as if she'd sensed something. She looked at Scarlett, and this time her eyes were fully clear, fully present. "Child, you're dying for me, aren't you? A stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore, Mrs." Scarlett tried to say, but her voice was only a whisper now. "I never asked your name." "Margaret," she said, her voice trembling. "Margaret Blackwood." "Margaret," Scarlett repeated, trying to smile even though her lips could barely move. "That's a beautiful name. Like a queen." Margaret tried to hold Scarlett tighter with what little strength she had left, trying to pass what warmth she could into the young woman who was dying because of her. "Hold on, Scarlett. Someone will come. I promise you. Someone will come." At 5:30 in the morning, the sky began to pale along the horizon, the first weak light of the new day slipping through the gray clouds. Both women were almost unconscious. Two bodies wrapped around each other in the brutal cold, one old and one young, one rich and one poor, yet both fighting death. And then, from far away, Scarlett heard a sound, an engine, coming closer. She wanted to open her eyes, to see who it was, to call for help, but she had no strength left. She only had enough to hold Margaret one last time before the darkness swallowed her. Vincent Blackwood drove his Bentley Continental GT through the night, steel, cold, gray eyes fixed on the snow-white road ahead. He'd just finished 3 days of tense negotiations with a Mexican cartel in Las Vegas, a deal worth millions of dollars that had gone exactly as planned, but instead of satisfaction, he felt only exhaustion and a strange unease he couldn't explain. All night long he hadn't been able to sleep, even stretched out on the softest bed a five-star hotel could offer. It wasn't because of work, not because of numbers or contracts. It was something else, a sense that something was wrong, as if someone were calling his name from very far away, as if something terrible was happening and he didn't know it. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he'd called Patricia, the housekeeper who'd been with the Blackwood family for more than 20 years. No one picked up. He called a second time, a third, a fourth. Still no answer. Maybe she's sleeping, he told himself. Maybe there's nothing to worry about. But the unease wouldn't let go. And so, instead of staying at the hotel until morning like he'd planned, Vincent decided to drive straight home in the dark. At 5:47 in the morning, the Bentley turned onto the familiar road leading to the Blackwood estate. Snow fell thick, whitening everything, turning the world into a cold, monochrome painting. Vincent pressed the remote, and the iron gate slowly opened. The headlights washed across the front courtyard, and his heart seemed to stop. His mother, Margaret Blackwood, 76 years old, was sitting slumped against the stone pillar by the gate, her head bowed to her chest, and a strange woman was holding her from behind, her body curved like a shield, as if she were trying to protect her from the cold of the world. For a moment, Vincent couldn't understand what he was seeing. His mind refused to process the image in front of him. Then everything hit at once. His mother. Snow. Cold. Danger. Mom. Oh my God. Mom. He threw open the car door and bolted out. His $1,000 leather shoes skidded on the ice. He almost went down, but he kept running. He didn't care about anything but the woman sitting motionless in the snow. When he reached them, he dropped to his knees, trembling fingers touching his mother's face. Cold, but there was still breath. Weak, but alive. The strange woman holding his mother looked as if she were already dead. Purple lips, ash-gray skin, a body so thin he could count each rib through the torn, fragile layers of clothing. But what stunned Vincent was that even unconscious, her arms were still locked around Margaret, as if even losing awareness, she still couldn't let go. Mom! Mom! Wake up! It's me, Vincent. He shook her gently, panic in his voice. Margaret's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and she looked at him without recognition. Richard? You came back. Vincent's heart tightened as if a hand had closed around it. She didn't recognize him. She thought he was her husband, a man who'd been dead for more than 10 years. The strange woman in his mother's arms suddenly stirred. She opened her eyes to a narrow slit and saw Vincent. In that instant, even balanced on the edge between life and death, Scarlett recognized it immediately. Danger. This man was dangerous. Tall, black-haired, eyes gray and icy as a blizzard, carrying a dark kind of power she'd learned to identify through 7 years of hell. But she didn't have the strength to fear him. She didn't have the strength for anything at all. She was lost, Scarlett whispered, her voice no more than a thin breath. Couldn't leave her. Then her eyes rolled back, and she slipped fully away. Vincent pulled out his phone at once and dialed a familiar number. Marcus, get to the mansion. Now, bring Dr. Harrison. He didn't call 911. Mafia didn't call the police. Police meant questions, investigations, the kind of trouble that wasn't needed. Doctor. Harrison had been the Blackwood family's private doctor for 20 years. Someone reliable, someone who knew how to keep quiet. Vincent carried his mother inside first, laid her on the sofa near the fireplace in the living room. Then he went back out and lifted the strange woman in his arms. Light. She was so light she seemed weightless, as if she were made of air and bone. Vincent felt each rib rising beneath the thin fabric, felt how her body was ice cold against him. How long had she been out there? How long had she endured that cold just to keep his mother alive? Patricia appeared at the staircase, eyes still heavy with sleep. Then panic broke across her face when she saw the scene in the living room. Oh my God, Mrs. Blackwood, what happened? Who is? Get blankets. Vincent cut in, his voice cold as steel. Hot water. Now. Patricia ran to obey, not daring to ask more. Vincent looked down at the strange woman lying motionless on the floor, her skin gray, her lips purple, her breathing so faint it was almost impossible to see. Then he looked at his mother, at the old, tattered blanket wrapped around her, a blanket that clearly didn't belong to the Blackwood family, a blanket that had once belonged to someone else. Who the hell are you? Vincent murmured, staring at the pale face of the strange woman. And why did you almost die for a stranger? Dr. Harrison arrived at the Blackwood estate at 6:15 in the morning, only 30 minutes after Vincent's urgent call. He'd been the Blackwood family's private physician for 20 years, and he'd seen more than enough, everything from knife wounds to bullets that had to be removed in silence. Still, the scene in the living room this morning stopped him short. 2 women lay on 2 sofas, one old, one young, both pale as ghosts, both fighting death. He examined Margaret first, as Vincent ordered. He placed the thermometer, listened to her heartbeat, checked her pulse and her blood pressure. Hypothermia, early stage, he reported, professional, but unable to hide his concern. Core temperature 35 degrees. She'll recover with warmth and rest, but another hour out there. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Vincent understood. 1 more hour in that cold, and his mother wouldn't have had a chance. Then Dr. Harrison turned to the unknown woman, and his face grew even more grave. This one, severe hypothermia, core temperature 32 degrees, dehydration, severe malnutrition. He looked up at Vincent. When was the last time she ate? No one knew the answer. No one knew anything about this girl except that she'd nearly died to save a stranger. Doctor. Harrison needed to remove Scarlett's clothing to examine her heart and lungs, to make sure hypothermia hadn't caused internal damage. Vincent started to turn away out of respect for her privacy, but the doctor's sharp intake of breath made him stop. Dear God. Vincent turned back, and what he saw made his blood boil. Scarlett's back wasn't the back of a normal human being. Long scars, tangled like a spiderweb, ran from her shoulders down to her lower back, scars from a whip, from lashes struck again and again, until the flesh could no longer heal cleanly. Round burns were scattered across her skin, each the size of a cigarette tip, leaving deep pitted scars in the pallor. And on her wrists were deep, unmistakable grooves, the marks of iron chains, of bindings, of years of being held like an animal. Doctor. Harrison had been a doctor for 30 years. He'd seen victims of domestic violence, of torture, of crimes too vile to put into words. He knew what these scars were. He knew where they came from. This woman has been through hell, he whispered, his voice trembling despite his effort to control it. Years of it, from the look of these scars. Whoever did this to her, they weren't trying to hurt her. They were trying to break her. Vincent stood rigid, gray eyes locked on the scarred back of the unconscious woman. He'd witnessed more violence than most people could imagine. He'd ordered more deaths than he could count. He'd seen blood, pain, the cruelty of human beings against human beings. But this was different. This wasn't the violence of the underworld, of enemies and allies, of wars for power and money. This was violence against someone innocent. This was pure brutality, without reason, without purpose beyond suffering. Who did this to her? Vincent asked. But it wasn't a question. It was a sentence. His voice was ice cold, yet in his gray eyes a fire flared, one Dr. Harrison had seen many times before, the kind of fire that meant someone was about to pay a very high price. Doctor. Harrison went on with his work, starting an IV for Scarlett, warming her body slowly to avoid thermal shock, monitoring her heart rate and blood pressure. After 1 tense hour, he finally let out a breath. She'll live, but she'll need rest, a lot of it. Her body has been through too much, not just tonight, but for years. She's severely malnourished, dehydrated, and exhausted. It's a miracle she survived out there as long as she did. Marcus arrived right after, a big man with an expressionless face, Vincent's right hand in every kind of work. He took in the living room, the 2 women being cared for, the look on his boss's face, and understood the situation without anyone needing to explain. Find out who she is, Vincent ordered, a voice that left no room for refusal. Everything about her, where she came from, what happened to her, and who did this. Marcus nodded. And if we find them? Vincent didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. After Dr. Harrison and Marcus left, Vincent sat down in the chair between the 2 sofas, where he could see both his mother and the unknown woman. Margaret was warmer now, sleeping a peaceful sleep, no longer shaking. Color was slowly returning to her face. Scarlett was still unconscious, but her breathing had steadied. Her lips were less purple. The old, tattered wool blanket she'd used to wrap his mother now lay neatly folded on the small table, Patricia having replaced it with expensive cashmere blankets. But Vincent knew what that old blanket meant. It was the only thing she had, and she'd given it away to save a stranger. He studied Scarlett's pale face, the marks on her wrists still visible beyond the edge of the covering. This girl had been through hell. She had every reason in the world to think only of herself, to turn bitter and cold, to trust no one. But instead, She'd stopped in the middle of a frozen winter night to save an unfamiliar old woman, had given away the last thing she owned, had nearly died to keep someone else alive. "Who are you, Scarlett?" Vincent whispered, looking at the unconscious girl with a kind of curiosity he'd never felt toward anyone. "And what the hell happened to you?" He didn't know that the answers to those questions would pull him into a spiral he would never be able to escape. 2 days later, Scarlett opened her eyes. Light, warmth, softness. Those were the first 3 things she registered before her mind fully surfaced. She was lying in a bed, a real bed, with sheets so smooth they felt like water sliding over her skin. The ceiling rose high above her, and a crystal chandelier glittered like frozen tears. The room was larger than the small apartment she and her mother had once lived in, with oil paintings on the walls and red velvet curtains sealing off the windows. And at once, the survival instinct honed over 9 years snapped on like an alarm system. "Where am I? Who brought me here? Exit. I need an exit." The thoughts raced through her head at dizzying speed as her eyes swept the room, searching for a way out. She tried to sit up, and her body answered with a tearing pain from head to toe, as if a truck had run her over. She looked down at herself and realized someone had changed her into clean silk sleepwear, soft and expensive beyond anything she'd ever touched. An IV needle sat in her hand, connected to a fluid bag hanging on a stand beside the bed. Panic surged in her chest. Who had changed her clothes? Who had seen the scars on her back? Where was she? And why was she here? The door opened, and Scarlett flinched on reflex, her hand clamping the edge of the blanket as if it were a useless weapon. But the person who stepped in wasn't the threat she'd imagined. It was a middle-aged woman, maybe 55 or 60, with a gentle face and worried eyes. "Oh, you're awake. Thank God," the woman blurted, hurrying to the bedside, then stopping when she saw the fear on Scarlett's face. "Please, don't move too fast. You've been through a lot." Where am I?" Scarlett asked, her voice rough from days without speaking. "The Blackwood estate," the woman answered softly. "I'm Patricia, the housekeeper. You saved Mrs. Blackwood's life, dear. You're safe here." Safe. Scarlett almost wanted to laugh at that word. She'd heard it too many times in 7 years of hell. "You're safe here," they'd said, before locking the door. "We'll take care of you," they'd said, before the lashes came down. She didn't believe in the word safe anymore. She didn't believe in anything anymore. The door opened again, and this time Scarlett felt the air in the room thicken all at once. A man stepped in. Tall, black hair, gray eyes cold as a snowstorm, a perfectly tailored black suit fitted over a powerful frame. Everything about him, from the way he stood to the way he looked, spelled danger. Scarlett recoiled on instinct, pressing her back hard to the headboard, eyes wide with fear. She knew men like this. She knew what they could do. Power, wealth, flawless appearances. It was all just a shell for the monsters underneath. Vincent recognized her reaction immediately. He stopped at a distance, not taking another step, as if he were trying not to frighten her further. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice low and even. Scarlett didn't answer. Her gaze locked on the door behind him, measuring distance, calculating the odds of running even though she knew. With her body this weak, she wouldn't get far. "You saved my mother's life," Vincent continued, his tone unchanged. Scarlett blinked, and the memory of that night came back slowly. The old woman, the snowy night, the cold. "Is she okay?" Scarlett asked in a whisper. "She's recovering. Thanks to you." Silence stretched between them, heavy and tight. "You almost died out there," Vincent said. "Why didn't you just leave her and find help?" "I tried," Scarlett answered, her voice flat. "No one opened their doors. I couldn't just leave her. Most people would. I'm not most people." Vincent looked at her, really looked, and Scarlett realized his eyes weren't the eyes of a predator the way she'd feared. They held curiosity, maybe even respect. "Name your price," he said abruptly. "What?" Scarlett didn't understand. "Money, a house, papers, a new identity. I can give you anything." "Name it." Scarlett stared at him as if he were insane. "I don't want anything. Everyone wants something. I just did what anyone would do." Vincent's voice dropped, carrying something strange. "No. Almost no one would. Trust me. I know." He took one step closer, and Scarlett flinched again. He stopped instantly. "My mother has Alzheimer's," he said. "She needs someone with her. A companion. Someone patient, kind." Scarlett didn't understand what he was saying, didn't understand where this conversation was going. "Stay here. Take care of her. You'll have a room, food, salary. I'll get you papers. Legal ones. A new start." "Why?" Scarlett asked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. You don't know me. I know you gave everything you had to save a stranger, Vincent answered, gray eyes holding hers. That tells me enough. Scarlett wanted to refuse, wanted to run. She didn't trust anyone, least of all powerful men with sweet promises. But she was tired, so tired. 9 years of running, 9 years of fear, 9 years without a place to call home. I'll think about it, she heard herself say. Vincent nodded. Take your time. You're safe here. Then he turned and walked out, closing the door behind him. Scarlett stared at the luxury around her, the soft bed beneath her, the warm light from the crystal chandelier. For the first time in 9 years, she had a real bed. For the first time in 9 years, she didn't have to worry about where she'd sleep tonight. She didn't know whether to trust or to fear. But a small part of her, the part she thought had died long ago, was whispering that maybe, just maybe, this was her last chance. A week passed. Scarlett was much stronger, her body slowly coming back to life on full meals and peaceful sleep in a soft bed. But she still couldn't decide whether she should stay or leave. Every day she woke up intending to gather her things and disappear before anyone changed their mind about her. And then she'd put it off, telling herself just one more day in this warmth and this safety. That morning, Patricia knocked on her door with a gentle smile and said that Mrs. Blackwood wanted to see her, that she'd been asking about her for days. Scarlett didn't know how to react. She followed Patricia through the mansion's long hallways, past expensive paintings and statues, until they reached the sitting room. Margaret was seated by the window, watching the snow fall outside with a faraway look. Patricia spoke softly, telling Mrs. Blackwood that someone was there to see her, and Margaret turned around, and something like a miracle happened. The eyes dulled by Alzheimer's suddenly brightened, like a candle lit in darkness, and she said that it was her, that she knew her. Scarlett froze, unable to believe what she was hearing. Margaret couldn't remember. She had Alzheimer's, and Vincent had told Scarlett that his mother often didn't even recognize her own son. But Margaret looked at her and called her the Sunset Girl, said she'd sung to her in the snow, then began to murmur the words of the song. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Scarlett felt as if someone had punched her in the chest. Margaret remembered. Somehow, inside the ruined maze of her mind, the memory of that night was still intact. Margaret told her to come closer, to sit with her, and Scarlett walked forward as if her legs didn't belong to her and sat down in the chair beside Margaret. The old woman took Scarlett's hand, thin but strangely warm. She said she didn't remember many things anymore, that faces blurred and names faded, that sometimes she didn't remember her own son's name. But she remembered Scarlett's voice. She remembered the way Scarlett had held her. She remembered feeling safe for the first time in so long. Tears began to slide down Margaret's cheeks, clear tears from someone who'd lived too long and lost too much. She thanked Scarlett for not leaving her to die alone, thanked her for staying when she could have walked away. And then something happened that Scarlett didn't think she could still do. She cried. For the first time in many years, she truly cried. Not silent tears swallowed in darkness, but ragged sobs she couldn't hold back. Through the tears she whispered that Margaret had reminded her of someone, and when Margaret asked who, Scarlett said it was her mother, that she'd been kind too, that she used to hold Scarlett just like Margaret had held her that night. Margaret squeezed Scarlett's hand tighter, as if trying to pour strength into her. She said kindness recognizes kindness, that it's how they find their people in this world, that souls touched by real kindness can always recognize each other. Scarlett shook her head and said she didn't have people anymore, not since her mother died. Margaret told her she did now, her voice suddenly strong and clear, and she asked Scarlett to stay with an old woman who forgets everything but somehow can't forget her, to stay with her. At the same time, upstairs in Vincent's private office, a very different conversation was unfolding. Marcus set a thin, fragile file on the desk, his expressionless face hiding what he'd found. He said he'd found what he could, that it wasn't much, that she barely existed on paper. Vincent opened the file, gray eyes skimming the few lines of information. Scarlett Marie Monroe, born in 1997 in Ohio. Mother was Linda Monroe, deceased in 2015 from cancer. Father unknown. And after 2015, there were no records at all, as if the girl had vanished from the earth. Marcus said he'd dug deeper, off the books, and Vincent looked up and waited. Marcus said that in 2015, right after her mother died, Scarlett had been recruited by a job agency that promised good work, high pay, a chance at a new life. Then he paused and said that agency was a front for a human trafficking ring. Vincent felt something go cold and spread through his chest. Marcus said 7 years. 7 years of captivity, Abuse, torture, a living hell. The scars on her back. Vincent understood now where they'd come from. Marcus said that in 2022, the FBI raided one of the ring's facilities and Scarlett escaped in the chaos. And from then on, she'd lived wandering the streets. No papers, no identity, not existing. Vincent closed the file, his face like stone, and asked who ran the trafficking ring. Marcus hesitated, something rare for a man as steady as him, then said the name Dmitry Volkov. The name struck like lightning. Dmitry Volkov, Vincent's rival in the underworld, the man he'd battled for years over territory and power. The man Vincent knew, had always known, was running a trafficking ring, and Vincent had looked away because it wasn't his business, because as long as Volkov didn't touch Vincent's territory, he didn't care what he did. Now the image of Scarlett's scarred back rose in Vincent's mind. The lashes, the burns, the chain marks, and he saw it as the consequence of looking away, the price someone paid because he chose not to care. Vincent asked whether she knew they were investigating her, and Marcus said no. Vincent told him to keep it that way, and then told Marcus to start gathering intel on Volkov's operation. Everything, every warehouse, every route, every associate, that he wanted to know where Volkov slept, what he ate, and who he trusted. Marcus nodded and left. Vincent stood, went to the window, and looked down at the snow-covered garden below, and he saw her. Scarlett was sitting beside his mother on the bench outside, both wrapped in thick blankets, talking about something. Margaret was laughing. A real laugh Vincent hadn't seen on his mother's face in a very long time. A victim of the ring he'd once ignored had saved his mother's life, had brought joy back to his mother's final days. The universe had a way of taking revenge with a brutal kind of fairness. Vincent whispered that he'd destroy Volkov, gray eyes fixed on the two women in the garden, not because it was business, but because he owed her that much. 2 weeks later, Ethan Blackwood came home from boarding school for winter break. The 13-year-old boy, with black hair like his father's and cold gray eyes, stepped out of the car with his suitcase rolling behind him. Not a trace of excitement for the house where he'd grown up. Patricia met him at the door, chattering about the girl who'd saved his grandmother on the snowy night, about how she'd stayed to care for Mrs. Blackwood, about how his grandmother had been so much happier since she arrived. Ethan only nodded to move it along. He didn't really care. He'd seen too many women come and go from this house. Beautiful women with radiant smiles and sweet promises. Women who approached his father for money and power. Women who pretended to love Ethan to win Vincent's favor, and then disappeared the moment they got what they wanted. He'd learned not to trust anyone, especially women who suddenly appeared in his family's life. Ethan walked into the sitting room and stopped when he saw a strange woman sitting beside his grandmother, reading aloud to her. He watched her in silence. Thin, pale, simple clothes, none of the expensive dresses or glittering jewelry. No lipstick, no painted nails, no heavy perfume. Strange. Everyone else always dressed like they were walking a red carpet whenever they were in the Blackwood estate. Scarlett looked up when she felt his gaze and smiled, a gentle smile with nothing forced in it. "Hi, you must be Ethan. Margaret talks about you all the time." Ethan didn't smile back. His face stayed stone cold as he answered. "It's Mrs. Blackwood for you, not Margaret." A tense silence settled over the room. Margaret was dozing in her chair, unaware of the confrontation unfolding. "She asked me to call her Margaret," Scarlett said softly, not sounding offended. "I'm sure she did," Ethan replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're good at making people like you, aren't you? Excuse me, I know your type. Gold digger. Waiting for the right moment to sink your claws into my dad." Ethan waited for an angry outburst, for excuses, for crocodile tears. But Scarlett did none of that. She only looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that made him uneasy. Not anger, sadness, as if she understood why he believed it, and that understanding hurt her. "I'm sorry you think that," she said, barely above a whisper. "Sorry doesn't mean anything," Ethan shot back coldly. "Actions do. And I'll be watching you." Over the days that followed, Ethan watched Scarlett like a hawk stalking prey. He waited for her to demand gifts, but she didn't. He waited for her to flirt with his father, but she kept a polite distance. He waited for her to complain when his grandmother forgot everything and asked the same question again and again dozens of times, but Scarlett answered each time with patience, as if it were the first. She played chess with his grandmother for hours, even though Margaret forgot the rules after every game, not like the others. But maybe she was just better at pretending. Ethan decided he'd wait. Sooner or later, she would reveal who she really was. They all did. One night, Ethan jolted awake with a scream trapped in his throat. Sweat soaked his forehead, his heart hammering out of rhythm, his breath coming fast and shallow. He'd been dreaming about his mother, the woman he only knew through photographs and the stories other people told. In the dream, she was standing there, smiling, lifting her hand and beckoning him closer. He ran toward her, but with every step he took, she slipped farther away, and when he reached for her, she dissolved like fog, leaving him alone in a cold, lightless dark. He went downstairs to get water, trying to shake off the lingering grip of the nightmare, but as he passed the glass door that led to the porch, he stopped. Someone was sitting out there. Scarlett. She was curled up in the chair, staring into the darkness of the snow-covered garden. Her shoulders trembled, and Ethan realized she was crying. He started to turn away. Not my problem. If she wants to cry, let her cry. What does it have to do with me? But then he heard her voice, whispering to a small photograph in her hand. I'm trying, Mom. I'm trying to be kind like you taught me. Some days it's so hard, but I'm trying. Ethan stood frozen, as if he'd been nailed to the floor. She'd lost her mother, too. She was talking to the dead, too. Like him. Exactly like him. He didn't know why, but his feet carried him onto the porch, and he sat down in the chair beside her. He didn't say anything. Scarlett wiped her tears quickly, trying to hide the photograph. Ethan, what are you doing up? Couldn't sleep. Nightmare. Me too. Silence followed, but it was a different kind of silence, no longer tight with tension and confrontation the way it had been in the days before. You have nightmares often? Ethan asked, his voice softer than he meant it to be. Every night, Scarlett answered honestly. Me too. About my mom. Even though I don't really remember her. That's the hardest part, isn't it? Scarlett said, her voice as light as breath. Missing someone you barely knew. Ethan didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. They sat there in silence, two lonely souls finding understanding in the last place they would have expected. In the days that followed, things began to change. Vincent started coming home earlier, no longer working late nights or taking long business trips. He ate dinner with the family, something that hadn't happened in years. One evening after dinner, when Ethan had gone upstairs and Margaret had gone to bed, Vincent asked Scarlett why she'd stayed that night, why she hadn't walked away to find someplace warm, when no one would have blamed her. Scarlett thought for a moment before she answered. Because I know what it feels like to need someone and have no one come. I couldn't do that to her. Vincent looked at her, gray eyes as if he were trying to solve a complicated riddle. You're not like anyone I've ever met. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet. A broken family began to find one another again. Not because of a miracle, but because a woman with nothing, who still gave everything, had stepped into their lives. 2 months passed, and Scarlett slowly grew used to life at the Blackwood estate. She woke each morning in a warm room with silk sheets soft against her skin, ate nourishing meals Patricia prepared, and spent most of her time at Margaret's side. The older woman depended on her more each day, calling her name the moment she woke, holding Scarlett's hand as she fell asleep, smiling whenever she saw her as if Scarlett were the only sunlight left in her fading world. Ethan had changed, too. The cold, suspicious boy he'd been now laughed more often, sometimes sitting beside Scarlett while she read to his grandmother, sometimes telling Scarlett about school and friends. And Vincent. Scarlett didn't know what to think about him. He was cold, yet kind in his own way. Dangerous, yet he never made her afraid. Sometimes she caught him watching her with a look she couldn't read, a look that held curiosity and something like a search for something she didn't understand. One night, Scarlett couldn't sleep. She lay awake for hours before deciding to go downstairs for water. The mansion was still in the dark, with only moonlight slipping through tall windows and laying pale, ghostly streaks across the marble floor. As she passed Vincent's office, she noticed the door was slightly open, and voices carried from inside. Curiosity beat caution. She stopped and listened. The Volkov warehouse is confirmed, Marcus's voice said. 12 girls, youngest is 14. When do we move? That was Vincent, cold and decisive. Tomorrow night. But boss, there will be casualties. Volkov's men? Yes. Then there will be casualties. No witnesses. No loose ends. The blood in Scarlett's body seemed to turn to ice. No witnesses. No loose ends. She'd heard those words before. In 7 years of hell, she'd heard them hundreds of times. From the men who held her. From the men who bought and sold her like merchandise. From the men who treated human life like trash. Vincent Blackwood was Mafia. She was living in a criminal's house, a killer's house. Scarlett ran back to her room, her heart pounding as if it might burst through her ribs. Her hands shook as she yanked her old backpack from the corner of the closet and stuffed clothes into it in a blind rush. She had to go. She had to go right now. She'd thought she'd escaped hell. Instead, she'd only moved from one hell into another. Going somewhere? Scarlett spun around, her heart stopping in her chest. Vincent stood in the doorway, expressionless, gray eyes fixed on her without blinking. She backed up until her spine hit the wall, nowhere left to retreat. "Stay away from me. You heard." It wasn't a question. "I heard enough. You're a murderer." Vincent didn't deny it. He also didn't come closer, staying on the threshold as if he respected the invisible line between them. "I am what I am. I won't deny it." "I can't stay here," Scarlett said, her voice trembling. "I trusted you." "I trusted, Scarlett. Look at me." She didn't want to, but something in his voice made it impossible not to. "I've killed people, that's true, but I've never hurt innocents. Never women. Never children." Scarlett gave a bitter, hollow laugh. "How noble of you." "Volkov," Vincent said, and the name struck Scarlett like lightning. "The man we're going after tomorrow. He runs the trafficking ring that held you for 7 years." Scarlett went still, as if all the air had been pulled from her lungs. How do you know about that?" "I know everything about you, Scarlett. I've known since the first week. Marcus investigated your background. I know about your mother, about the agency that tricked you, about the 7 years in hell, about the raid that helped you escape." He knew. He'd known all along and hadn't said a word. "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Because it's your story to tell, when you're ready. If you're ever ready. It wasn't my place to force you to relive that trauma." "The raid tomorrow," Scarlett said, trying to make sense of the flood of information crashing through her. "It isn't just business, is it?" "No," Vincent admitted. "It's personal. For you. I didn't ask you to do anything for me." "No, you didn't. But Volkov's ring is still operating. 12 girls in that warehouse right now. Girls like you were. 14, 15, 16 years old. Scared, alone, hopeless." He stepped closer by one pace, and this time Scarlett didn't shrink back. "I can't bring back your 7 years. I can't undo what they did to you. But I can make sure no one else loses theirs. I can burn down the empire that destroyed you." Scarlett didn't know what to say. Her head swam with clashing, tangled feelings. "I am a monster by most standards," Vincent said, his voice dropping. "I've done terrible things. I will probably do more, but I will never hurt you, Scarlett, and I will burn down anyone who does." Scarlett stood there with the backpack still on her shoulder, staring at the man in front of her. He was a criminal. He killed people, but he was also preparing to destroy the hell that had held her. He was doing what she'd dreamed of for 9 years, what she'd never had the strength to do herself. "I don't know what to think anymore," she whispered. "Then don't think. Just stay. One more night. If you still want to leave after tomorrow, I won't stop you. One more night." She could do that. Slowly, Scarlett set the backpack down on the floor. Scarlett couldn't sleep all night. She sat by her bedroom window, looking down at the front courtyard of the estate, washed in the glare of security lights. At midnight, she saw Vincent and Marcus step out through the main doors, get into a car, and drive into the darkness. She didn't know where they were going or what they would do, but she knew that when they returned, the world would be different. The hours that followed stretched out without end. She sat there watching the sky shift from black to gray to the faint blush of dawn as morning began to rise. Then, at 5 o'clock, she heard an engine. Vincent and Marcus were back. Scarlett didn't know why she ran down the stairs, didn't know why her heart was pounding so hard. She stood in the hallway when the front door opened and Vincent walked in. There was blood on his sleeve, dark red against the white fabric of his shirt. She knew it wasn't his blood because he moved normally, no sign of injury. She should have been afraid. She should have run. She should have been sickened by the man standing in front of her with someone else's blood on his clothes. But instead she only asked, "The girls?" Vincent looked at her, gray eyes exhausted, yet carrying something like relief. "Safe. On their way to FBI protection. Volkov." A short pause. "Handled." Scarlett understood what that word meant. Volkov was dead. The man who had run the trafficking ring that held her for 7 years was dead. She should have been disgusted. She should have condemned violence and killing. But when she thought of what Volkov had done to her, to hundreds of other girls, to 14 and 15-year-olds sold like merchandise, she felt only one thing. Good. Vincent stared at her, clearly surprised. "That's not the reaction I expected." "I spent 7 years in his hell," Scarlett said, her voice flat. I've dreamed about someone burning it down. Every single night for 9 years. I just didn't think someone actually would. After that night, Scarlett didn't bring up leaving again. Not because she'd fully accepted what Vincent was. She still didn't know what to think about him, about the underworld he belonged to, about violence and spilled blood. But Margaret needed her. Ethan needed her. And maybe, just maybe, she needed them, too. 3 weeks later, everything changed. Marcus knocked on Vincent's office door, his face more serious than Scarlett had ever seen it. "We have a problem." "What?" "Volkov's men, the ones who survived. They know about Scarlett." Vincent shot up from his chair. "How?" Someone talked. "They know she's here. They know she's the one who escaped during the FBI raid 2 years ago. They want her back. Back. She's evidence, boss. The only victim who escaped and is still alive. If she testifies against the remaining members of the ring." "She won't testify," Vincent cut in. "I won't let her go through that. They don't know that. They see her as a threat, and they want to eliminate the threat." The threats began to arrive. Photos of Scarlett in the garden while she sat with Margaret. Photos of her in a car while Patricia took her shopping. Photos of her stepping out of the estate's front doors. They were watching her. They knew where she was, what she did, where she went. Vincent called Scarlett into his office and showed her the photos. Her face went pale as she understood what they meant. "You're not safe anymore," Vincent said, his voice tight. "I've never been safe," Scarlett answered. "Not really. Not since I was 18. This is different. They're coming for you specifically. Then I should leave." She stood, survival instinct flaring again. "I'm putting everyone in danger. Margaret, Ethan, you. If I leave, they'll follow me and—" "No." Vincent took her hand, and Scarlett realized it was the first time he'd touched her since the night he carried her inside from the snow. His hand was warm and steady, nothing like what she imagined a killer's hands would feel like. "You're not running anymore. This is your home now. They want to take you. They'll have to go through me first. You can't leave." A third voice came from the doorway, and both of them turned. Ethan stood there, his face set hard, but his eyes red. He'd heard the entire conversation. "Ethan, you promised Grandma you'd stay," he said, his voice trembling. "You promised me. You don't get to break that." Scarlett looked at the boy, trying to be strong, trying to hide the fear of losing one more person in a short life already crowded with loss. "I don't want to put you in danger," she said softly. "We're Blackwoods," Ethan replied, lifting his chin. "Danger is in our blood. At least now we have something worth fighting for." Scarlett looked at Vincent, then at Ethan. A mafia boss with someone else's blood on his hands. A 13-year-old boy who'd lost his mother when he was still a baby. An Alzheimer's grandmother slowly forgetting everything except the girl who'd saved her in the snow. The strangest family in the world. But her family... "Okay," Scarlett said at last. "I'll stay. But if things get too dangerous..." "They won't," Vincent promised. Gray eyes locked on hers. "I promise. A promise." Scarlett didn't know if she should believe it. But she wanted to. For the first time in 9 years, she wanted to believe in someone. 2 weeks after Vincent's promise, everything collapsed in a single night. At 11 o'clock at night, Vincent left the estate for a meeting with an important partner, a meeting that couldn't be canceled or delayed. Marcus went with him, as always. That left only Scarlett, Margaret, Ethan, and 2 bodyguards stationed on watch. Scarlett was sitting in Margaret's room, reading to her as she did every night, when it began. The power went out, not fading the way a normal outage does, but snapping off as if someone had cut the electricity to the entire mansion. Darkness swallowed everything. Then gunshots. 2 of them. Suppressed. Not too loud. But Scarlett knew exactly what they were. 7 years in hell had taught her to recognize the sound of a gun from anything else. 2 shots. 2 bodyguards. They were inside. The survival instinct forged in those 7 years flared instantly, sweeping away fear and replacing it with cold focus. Scarlett shook Margaret awake, gentle but urgent. "Margaret, wake up. We need to move. Now." The older woman opened her eyes, clouded and confused in the dark. "What's happening, dear? Bad people are here, but I'm going to keep you safe. Trust me." Scarlett helped Margaret out of bed and into the hallway. The moment she stepped out, she ran straight into Ethan, rushing toward her, the boy's face pale in the moonlight spilling through the windows. "Scarlett, what?" "No time. Follow me. Stay quiet." She held Margaret's hand with one hand, Ethan's with the other, and led them through the pitch-dark halls. She knew about the panic room in the basement. Vincent had shown it to her a week earlier, saying, just in case. She hadn't thought she'd need it so soon. Down the stairs, through a corridor, to the heavy steel door disguised as part of the wall. The code. Vincent had given her the code. Her fingers trembled as she tapped each number in the darkness. But she didn't make a mistake. The door opened with a soft click. She pushed Margaret and Ethan inside the small room stocked with emergency lights, water, food, and a private line. Stay here. Lock it from inside. Don't open for anyone except Vincent or Marcus. What about you? Ethan asked, his voice shaking. I need to lead them away from here. No, you can't. Ethan, look at me. Scarlett knelt, gripped the boy's shoulders, and looked straight into his bright eyes. Your grandma needs you. Your dad needs you. I won't let anything happen to this family. Not when I can stop it. But they'll kill you. Maybe. But I've survived worse. Now close the door. She stood, stepped out, and shut the steel door before Ethan could argue again. She heard the lock slide from inside, and she knew they were safe, at least for now. She pulled out her phone and sent a single message to Vincent. They're here. E&M safe in panic room. I'll buy time. Then she ran, not toward an exit, but toward the noise. If they wanted her, they'd get her. She only had to hold them off long enough for Vincent to come back. 6 men were tearing through the sitting room when Scarlett walked in. Black masks, guns in hand, flashlight beams slicing the dark. She stood in the center of the room, unarmed, and spoke. Looking for me. All 6 guns swung toward her at once. Where are the others? One of them demanded. Gone. I sent them away. Just me here. Bullshit. Search the house. 3 went to search. 3 stayed with her. 1 stepped closer, and before she could react, he backhanded her hard enough to knock her to the floor, blood flooding her mouth. You think you can hide from us? Volkov wanted to make an example out of you. Volkov is dead, Scarlett said, lifting her head to look at him even as blood ran from her lips. But his legacy lives on. And you're going to wish you died in that warehouse 7 years ago. Scarlett smiled, the smile of someone who had nothing left to lose, the smile of someone who'd walked through hell and survived. You know what I learned in that warehouse. How to survive, how to wait, how to hold on until help comes. The man laughed, cold and cruel. No one's coming for you, sweetheart. And right then, an engine roared outside, shouting, gunfire. Vincent was back. What happened after that moved too fast for Scarlett to follow. Vincent came into the sitting room like a storm. Blood on his shirt, not his blood, but the blood of the men who'd gotten in his way. He saw Scarlett on the floor, her lip bleeding, bruises blooming across her face. He saw the 3 men still in the room. No one saw Vincent kill. No one survived to tell the story. When it was over, he dropped to his knees beside Scarlett, gray eyes full of worry and something else she didn't dare name. Are you okay? I'll live. Why didn't you hide with them? You could have been safe. Scarlett looked at him, her eyes bright even with blood on her face. They're my family now. You don't run from family. Vincent pulled her into his arms, for the first time, his embrace firm and warm around her trembling body. You almost died for them, and I'd do it again. I know. That's what scares me. In the panic room, Ethan and Margaret waited in fear. When the steel door opened and they saw Scarlett standing there, alive, Ethan threw himself into her arms as if he would never let go. Don't ever do that again. Don't ever leave me like that again. I'm sorry. I'm here. I'm okay. Margaret, drifting in and out, took Scarlett's hand and smiled. The smile of someone who knows everything even when she can't remember anything. I knew you'd keep them safe. I always knew. 4 months had passed since the night of the attack. The remaining men from Volkov's operation had been handled, one by one, until there was no one left who could threaten Scarlett anymore. For the first time in 9 years, she was truly safe. But while Scarlett's life was slowly settling into something steady, Margaret was slowly slipping away from them. The Alzheimer's progressed quickly, faster than anyone had predicted. With each passing day, she lost another piece of memory, like pages being torn from a book one by one until the book was empty. She no longer remembered Richard, the husband who had been beside her for 60 years, the man she had called for on the snowy night. She no longer remembered Evelyn, the beloved daughter taken too soon, the one she had spoken of to Scarlett with eyes full of love. Sometimes she didn't even remember Vincent, the son sitting right beside her, holding her hand with pain in his eyes as she looked at him like a stranger. But she remembered Scarlett. Somehow, inside the ruined maze of Margaret's mind, Scarlett remained the one light that never went out. The sunset girl, she would often whisper when she saw Scarlett. She sang to me in the snow, every day, even as she forgot everything else. Margaret still smiled when Scarlett entered the room. You came back. I knew you would. And Scarlett always answered, even though her heart broke every time she heard it. "I'll always come back, Margaret. Always." Vincent didn't travel for business anymore. He stayed home, close to his mother, refusing meetings and deals Marcus could handle in his place. Ethan asked to leave boarding school and switched to being taught at home so he could stay near his grandmother in her final days. Every evening they gathered around Margaret's bed. Scarlett read aloud, books Margaret had once loved even though she no longer remembered the stories. Ethan played the piano, gentle pieces his grandmother had taught him when he was small. Vincent simply sat there, holding his mother's hand in silence, as if he were trying to memorize every moment before it vanished forever. They all knew there wasn't much time left. One afternoon, as sunset light poured through the bedroom window, a miracle happened. Margaret opened her eyes, and for the first time in months, they were clear, fully awake, fully present. What doctors call terminal lucidity, the final moment of clarity many Alzheimer's patients experience before they go. "Vincent," she called, her voice sharp and certain. "My boy." Vincent froze, afraid to believe what he was hearing. Mom, I see you," Margaret said, tears sliding down her wrinkled cheeks. "I remember you." "Oh, my darling boy. I'm so sorry I forgot. I'm so sorry," Vincent cried. For the first time, Scarlett saw him cry, tears running down the face that was always cold and hard. He held his mother, his shoulders shaking. Margaret looked around the room, at her son, at her grandson standing beside the bed with red-rimmed eyes, at the girl who had saved her life on that fateful snowy night. "Everyone's here," she said, smiling. "Good. I have some things to say." Margaret was so weak, yet her voice stayed clear, as if she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment to say what needed to be said before it was too late. She looked at Scarlett and lifted her hand in a small wave. "Come closer, sunset girl." Scarlett knelt beside the bed, took Margaret's thin hand in hers, and tears began to fall even as she tried to hold them back. "You found us that night. Or maybe we found you. Either way, it was meant to be." Margaret squeezed her hand, old eyes shining with love. "You are the daughter I always wished I had. Thank you for the sunset, for the song, for staying when you could have left me in the snow. Thank you for saving my son, my grandson, this broken family." She paused to catch her breath, then went on. "Take care of my boys, Scarlett. They need someone like you. Someone kind." Then she turned to Vincent, her son kneeling beside the bed with eyes raw and red. "My darling boy, you've spent so long being hard, being cold. It kept you alive. I know. But you don't need armor anymore." She touched his face with a trembling hand. "Let yourself love her, Vincent. She's worthy of it, and you're worthy of being loved. Don't forget that. Don't ever forget that." Margaret looked toward Ethan, the boy standing at the foot of the bed, shoulders shaking as he fought his sobs. "My sweet grandson. Come here." Ethan moved closer and sat beside her, and Margaret took his hand. "Your mother sent her, you know." "I believe that now. She sent Scarlett to take care of you. When you're sad, when you miss her, look at Scarlett. That's your mother's love made real. Believe in that." Margaret looked at all three of them, the people she loved most, and smiled. "Home isn't a place. It's where someone waits for you. You three, wait for each other. Always." She took Vincent's hand and Scarlett's hand and placed them together, one over the other. "Family isn't blood. It's who stays. Stay with each other. Promise me." "I promise, Mom," Vincent said, his voice breaking. "I promise," Scarlett whispered. "I promise, Grandma," Ethan sobbed. Margaret smiled, the most peaceful smile Scarlett had ever seen on her face. "Richard is calling me. Evelyn too. I can hear them." She closed her eyes, her breathing growing softer and softer. "I'm going home now." And she didn't open her eyes again. Scarlett cried, unable to stop herself anymore. Margaret was the second woman who had loved her like a daughter, and she was the second woman Scarlett had lost. The familiar pain, terrifying in how well she knew it, tore through her chest, but this time she wasn't alone. Vincent held his mother one last time, then turned and held Scarlett, his arms firm and warm around her like a promise he didn't have to speak. Ethan wrapped his arms around both of them, the 13-year-old boy crying the way he'd never been allowed to cry. The three of them stood there in the quiet room flooded with sunset light, crying together, leaning on each other. Family. At last, Margaret had given them that before she went. Margaret Blackwood's funeral was held in private, with only family and the closest people. No reporters, no gawkers, none of the spectacle the world always expected from the Blackwood family. Only the people who truly loved her stood in silence beneath the slate-gray December sky, watching the casket lowered slowly into the earth. Margaret was laid to rest beside Richard, her husband of 60 years, and Evelyn, the beloved daughter taken too soon. At last, she'd gone home to the ones she loved. On the headstone, the words were carved simply, yet heavy with meaning. Margaret Blackwood, 1948 to 2024. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, home is where someone waits for you. After the funeral, people drifted away. The Blackwood estate fell into silence, a silence so heavy and hollow Scarlett had never felt here before. No more Margaret's laughter. No more stories about Richard and Evelyn. No more clouded eyes that suddenly brightened when Scarlett walked into the room. Scarlett stood at the main gate, where everything had begun, where she'd found Margaret on that fateful snowy night. She looked down at the old backpack on her shoulder. The backpack she'd never thrown away, even with a full closet of clothes now, as if part of her had always known this moment would come. Margaret was gone. The reason she'd stayed was gone. Maybe it was time to keep walking, to search for someplace else to belong. Going somewhere. Vincent's voice came from behind her, and Scarlett didn't turn around. She couldn't look at him right now, couldn't let him see the tears gathering in her eyes. Margaret was the reason I stayed. She's gone now. I don't belong here anymore, don't you? Footsteps came closer, and then Vincent stood beside her, both of them looking out at the snow-covered courtyard. Look at me, Scarlett. She turned, and what she saw tightened her throat. Vincent looked exhausted, sleepless nights stamped into the angles of his face. But his eyes, those cold gray eyes she'd grown used to over the past months, weren't cold anymore. They were warm, gentle, and filled with something she didn't dare name. You think Margaret is the only reason I want you here? Scarlett couldn't answer. She couldn't find a voice. I fell in love with you somewhere between watching you read to my mother and watching you almost die for my son, Vincent said, his voice low and steady. I don't know exactly when. I just know I can't imagine this house without you anymore. I can't imagine my life without you anymore. Scarlett blinked, unable to believe what she was hearing. You, what? I love you. He said it plainly, without detours, the way Vincent Blackwood did everything, and I know I'm a monster by most standards. I've done terrible things. I will probably do more. I'm not a good man, Scarlett. I've never pretended to be, Vincent, but I'm selfish enough to ask anyway. He pulled a small box from his coat pocket. Not a luxurious red velvet box like in romantic movies, but a simple wooden box, worn, as if it had been kept through generations. He opened it, and Scarlett saw the ring inside. Not a diamond, not expensive gems she knew Vincent could buy without blinking. Just a small stone, orange-red, catching the weak light of the winter afternoon. A sunset stone, Vincent said, because you're my sunset girl too. Scarlett looked at the ring, looked at Vincent, looked at the mansion behind them, where Ethan stood at the window, pretending not to watch, yet clearly tracking every movement they made. She'd spent her whole life looking for home. She'd thought she'd never find it. And then one snowy night, one lost old woman, one choice to stop instead of walk on. She'd found home in the arms of a stranger in a blizzard, in the eyes of a boy who'd lost his mother and was starving for love, in the heart of a dangerous man who'd burned her hell to the ground. I spent my whole life looking for home, she whispered, lifting her hand to Vincent's face. I thought I'd never find it, but then a frozen night. A woman lost in the snow, a family who chose me when no one else would. She smiled, her first smile since Margaret had gone. You're not a good man, but you're a good man to me, and that's all I need. Is that a yes? Vincent asked, and Scarlett could see the tension in his eyes, the fear of rejection he was trying to hide. It's a you better not make me regret this. I'll try my best. Then yes. Yes, Vincent Blackwood. I'll stay. From the window, Ethan's shout rang out. Finally. I thought you two would never figure it out. Scarlett laughed. A real laugh, the sound rising into the cold air like a melody she'd forgotten long ago. Vincent slid the ring onto her finger. No flash. No movie romance. Just soft falling snow, two people standing at the gate where everything had begun, and a boy running out of the house to throw his arms around them both. Home. At last, Scarlett was home. 5 years later, Scarlett Blackwood stood on the stage of Margaret's house, the nonprofit she had founded to help survivors of human trafficking the way she once needed help herself. The annual gala drew more than 500 guests, donors, business leaders, people who believed in the mission she had chosen to carry. Millions of dollars were raised to keep the rescues going. Scarlett looked out over the room, and she began to speak. 5 years ago, I was homeless, broken, invisible. I had $23 and a blanket my mother made for me. That was all I owned in this world. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on her. But I had something else. Something money can't buy. Kindness. My mother taught me that before she died. And on the coldest night of my life, that kindness saved me. It led me to a woman lost in the snow. It led me to a family who chose me when no one else would. It led me home. Over the past 5 years, Margaret's house had rescued more than 300 trafficking survivors, providing safe housing, education, jobs, and therapy to heal the wounds the world had carved into them. The organization had become one of the leading nonprofits in the fight against trafficking. And Scarlett, the girl who'd once been homeless with $23.17 in her pocket, was now leading that fight. Vincent sat in the front row, his gray eyes never leaving his wife on the stage. He had changed over the past 5 years, washing his hands of the Mafia world. Not completely, but enough to live a different life. He shifted into legitimate business, still dangerous in his own way, but without spilled blood, without nights coming home with stains on his shirt. He changed for her. For their family. In his arms, little Margaret Rose Blackwood, 2 years old, slept deeply. They had named their daughter after Vincent's mother, the woman who had brought them together on that fateful snowy night. Beside Vincent, Ethan listened to Scarlett speak, pride shining in his eyes. The 13-year-old boy who'd once been all anger and suspicion was 18 now, newly accepted into a university psychology program. He wanted to help kids like he'd been, kids who'd lost their mother, lost their direction, and didn't know where they belonged. Scarlett showed me that family is a choice, Ethan had written in his application essay. Now I want to help others find their family too. After the gala, the family returned to the Blackwood estate. A December night, light snow falling, just like that night 5 years ago, but everything was different now. Scarlett stood before the bronze plaque mounted by the gate, the words cut deep into the metal as if carved into her heart. In memory of Margaret Blackwood, who taught us that home is where someone waits for you, and family is who stays. She touched the inscription the way she always did when she needed to remember, when she needed to feel the presence of the woman who had changed her life. Ethan stepped out and stood beside her, still talking to her, always. He looked at the plaque, then at Scarlett. You know what I realized? That night saved all of us. What do you mean? Grandma Margaret, obviously, but also Dad. It reminded him what really mattered. Me, it gave me a sister and showed me what real courage looks like. And you, it gave you everything. Scarlett smiled, tears glinting in the light. We saved each other. That's what family does. Vincent stepped outside, holding little Margaret Rose now awake in his arms. The toddler reached her tiny hands toward Scarlett, her clear little voice rising. Mama! Hello, my sunshine. Scarlett gathered her daughter into her arms and kissed the soft hair on her head. Vincent stood beside his wife, looking at her with a gaze full of love. It's cold out here. I know. Just saying thank you. He understood. He always understood. The whole family stood there at the gate where everything had begun. Vincent, Scarlett, Ethan, baby Margaret Rose. Snow drifted around them like a miracle, like a blessing from the one who was gone. Scarlett touched the plaque one last time. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for being lost that night. Thank you for letting me find you. Thank you for giving me a family, a home, a life worth living. Mom always said kindness is the only wealth they can't take from you. She was right. Kindness led me to you, and you led me home. Little Margaret Rose tugged Scarlett's hand, her small voice piping up. Mama cold. You're right, sweetheart. Let's go inside. Vincent opened the door, and warm light spilled out from within. Come on. Hot cocoa is waiting. Margaret's recipe. Ethan laughed and ran ahead. Race you to the kitchen. Scarlett stepped into the warm light of the house, then looked back one more time. Snow falling, the bronze plaque shining, the place where she'd almost died to save a stranger. She'd thought she would die that night. Instead, she had only just begun to live. You're never poor if you still have kindness. I know, Mom. I know. She closed the door and walked into the place where her family was waiting. The story of Scarlett and the Blackwood family has come to an end, but the lessons it leaves behind will keep echoing in our hearts. This is a story about the extraordinary power of kindness, about how one small act of compassion can change an entire life, not only for the one who receives it, but also for the one who gives. Scarlett had nothing but $23 and the blanket her mother knitted, but she had something more valuable than anything else, a heart still capable of love, and a promise to her mother that she would hold on to kindness no matter how harsh life became. This story also teaches us that family doesn't have to be people who share your blood. Family is the people who choose to stay when things get hard, the people willing to sacrifice for each other, the place where someone is waiting for you to come home. Margaret was right. Home isn't a location. Home is where someone waits for you. And sometimes, strangers become the closest family we will ever have. In real life, we may not face circumstances as extreme as Scarlett's, but every day we have the chance to show kindness, even if it's only a smile to a stranger, a word of encouragement to someone struggling, or simply stopping to help when someone needs it. You never know how your small act might change someone's life. How did this story make you feel? Was there a moment that brought you to tears? Have you ever met kind people in your life? The way Scarlett found the Blackwood family? We'd truly love to hear what's in your heart. Leave a comment below so we can talk and connect with each other. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more moving stories every day. Please like and share this video with the people you love, because sometimes the right story at the right time can change how someone sees life. We sincerely thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish every one of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peaceful days ahead. Keep kindness in your heart, because as Scarlett's mother said, kindness is the only wealth no one can ever take from you. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.